Hi, everyone. Arsalan Arif here with Endpoints News, and thanks for joining us today for Making the Case for Digital Transformation in Biotech R&D, where we're discussing how digital transformation not only fuels scientific innovation, but also how it has turned from a nice-to-have solution to a need-to-have solution to future-proof biotech R&D and to stay competitive in a rapidly evolving industry. I'm excited to introduce today's panel, and please welcome John Conway, the founder and chief visioneer of 2015 Visioneers, Aaron Sato, the CSO of Twist Biosciences, and your moderator today will be Lauren Perelman, Principal Solutions Excellent Consultant at Benchling. Now, if you have any questions, be sure to hit the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We have reserved some time at the end to answer your questions. And now I'm going to pass it up to Lauren. Lauren?
Great. Thanks so much, Arsalan. I think we'll dive in by getting to know our panelists a little bit better. And so, Aaron, I'm going to start with you. If you could tell us a bit more about your background, how did you get from the beginning to CSO of Twist Bioscience?
Great. Yeah, thanks for the intro. Yeah, so again, my name is Aaron Sato. I'm the CSO of Twist Bioscience. I came to Twist about 5 years ago. My background is entirely in antibody engineering, antibody drug discovery. And, I got my degree at MIT about 20 years ago, and I've been slowly working through a number of companies in the small to medium-sized biotech industry, really focused on using synthetic libraries to help others discover and optimize antibodies. I've worked at a number of companies focused on external innovation, helping others do through service, as well as in other companies, really helping them drive their own internal drug discovery pipeline. And about 5 years ago, I was recruited by Twist to start up this new division focused on using DNA products that Twist was creating to help others discover and optimize antibodies. And it's been a really fantastic journey for me to really see how we can power up antibody discovery and drug discovery using DNA.
Awesome.
And my other hat at Twist is also my CSO hat, which is where I'm kind of using my experience in drug discovery to help Twist kind of innovate and create new products that enables them to help out in the life science industry.
That's great. Yeah, Twist is very exciting, been on the map for a while now. Can you tell us a bit more kind of like big picture, DNA antibodies, like what are kind of like the top 3 to 5 things that you're most excited about at Twist these days?
We're founded on, again, our SynBio offering in the beginning. So our core technology is our DNA writer, where we can make up to 1 million individual oligos up to 300 base pairs in length. And we use those oligo pools to make all of the DNA products that Twist sells. Initially, we were founded on this idea of using that technology for making gene fragments and custom clonal genes, which has enabled people to, in all different fields, not just drug discovery, to make not only proteins, but engineered cell lines, help enable cell therapy, and even move into other DNA products, for example, libraries, where we can actually make not just one gene, but actually a multitude of different variants of a specific gene. All of these DNA products have so much impact in the workflow of what all these different industries are doing. It was just so amazing to me to think about how DNA is so critical in everything that we do in a number of industries. I thought it was only important for life sciences and drug discovery, but for so many different fields, DNA has always been a bottleneck. And for me, it's always been, a major hurdle for me before I came to Twist. So to really see how DNA and having a technology that allows us to actually help others provide multitude of DNA constructs in a untapped way, it has really helped kind of unlock a lot of science that was previously inhibited because of the bottlenecks of the current technologies.
What is the most surprising use case for DNA that you didn't expect that you see now?
Well, I now see that, we're working with a number of our partners, like, for example, Neogene, who are, really using a multitude of our products, from custom clonal genes to libraries, that enables their entire workflow. Like they really, literally, are dependent on the ability of having this plentiful source of DNA and what we can offer to help enable them to find unique TCRs that help drive their adopted T-cell therapy. So it's really it's so exciting to see how you know, our platform, which, you know, when you think about it, it's a pretty simple idea of creating plentiful DNA, is really helping so many different companies, you know, develop their own workflow and their own data systems to help drive their specific fields, in this case, cell therapy for Neogene. So that's what's really exciting to me, is to see how we can help so many other people through the DNA that we create and the ways of the different types of products that we can create from DNA.
Yeah, very cool. That's kind of all hyper threading together at this point.
Yeah. I
I'm
love to
gonna
see when
plan-
people use, I love to see when people use multiple products too. Like they use, like they create a whole workflow and it's built off of like multiple components along the way to find that final therapeutic or thing that they go out and help others with.
Biotech is just becoming one giant turducken of different technologies.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to plant a flag on what you said about the technology stacks at Neogene and Twist, and hand over to John for a moment, but we'll come back to that
Sure.
to talk about digitalization. John, I'm asking you the same. So John is the chief visionary and founder of 2015 Visioneers. Tell us about how did you get to 2015 Visioneers, and what does 2015 Visioneers do?
Sounds great. Yeah, no, I spent 30 years in drug discovery and software design and building scientific software. My last role was global head of R&D IT for AstraZeneca. So, I mean, I kind of like to say I started all the way at the bench and worked all the way up, kind of got out of the wet side of science and chemistry and biology and made my way into informatics and IT over the years. And I think I learned early on in my early days back at Merck that how important data was to everything that we were doing. And not only the amount of data, but the quality of data, what I like to call now model quality data. And so everything that we do with clients is thinking about building model quality data because of the benefits of machine learning and artificial intelligence, everything that you'll get from that. So when you're doing all your work, make sure that things are highly contextualized and ready to go so that we can take a company or a client can take full, advantage of a machine learning strategy or artificial intelligence strategy, et cetera. So I've computational sciences, analytical sciences, informatics, software design. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to wrap that all up and start this company from a consulting perspective, but we also do marketing services because what we found is there's not a lot of companies out there that truly get this space. And we've been able to help a lot of those scientific software companies improve their products. So it's been fantastic.
Really awesome. You had said, the goal is model quality data. I'm curious, what sorts of gaps do you see, like kind of current state? What are companies struggling to do best to get to model quality data?
Yeah, well, I think the pandemic was the only silver lining that I saw in our space for the pandemic is what people realize, oh my gosh, we can't access our data. We're having trouble with our on-prem systems, so people can't work from home and get things done. And I think it finally lit a little bit of a fire under a lot of companies to say we need to do a lot better. And I think that's happening. But in the same sense, there's really multiple aspects to all this. Today, still the biggest issue or the biggest roadblock is culture and data culture, process culture, and like just saying, hey, as a company, as a unit, as a department, we're going to follow this scientific data strategy that helps us select instruments, pick scientific software, contextualize our data. You just go down the line, and then it also says, and by the way, we're all responsible for it. And these certain people will wear, bigger hats for that, and others will just make sure whatever they do that their data is done properly and it gets to where it needs to go. And I think that it's just human behavior that still is holding us back a little bit.
So it's all about empowering everyone to be a steward of the process and the product.
Totally.
Very cool. So Aaron, I want to come back to what you had said earlier about the digital systems. Maybe you can kind of give us to the extent that you can share, what is the digital lay of the land at Twist? How do you manage that incredible throughput that you have and the variation in programs that you have as well?
Yeah, great question. So before I came to Twist, I always thought like technology and people were enough to drive innovation in a company. But what I've learned at Twist is that when you're developing like products or services, the workflow and the data systems that you need to manage that workflow are really critical. So even though like technology and people are very critical, and going back to the culture as well, you know, we've invested a lot in automation and systems to basically help us track and run that workflow, and to enable us to very quickly scale the process of DNA synthesis. So it's a multi-step process. And typically people in this industry would scale it with people. They would just add more and more people and to help kind of scale the workflow. But we've taken a different approach. We've tried to automate as much as we possibly can. We've tried to put as many workflow systems in place to help our operators move things through the workflow. And then we've also created a lot of information systems to capture all the data as we're doing it, so that even though we do have a lot of people at Twist, you know, we're a company of over 1,000 people, you know, we try to be as lean as we possibly can and use software and data systems as a way to help us scale, because you can only scale linearly with people. But if you enable automation and data systems to help you scale, you can actually scale almost exponentially. So that's been our view. And I really love this approach. And now I'm actually applying it throughout the entire company in other areas too, like even to service, like to products, it makes a lot of sense. But in terms of like applying this model to like the biopharma group, where we're doing services for others to help them discover and optimize antibodies, we can apply the same learnings in terms of automating our workflow and making sure that we have data systems to capture all of the data and to then use that data to its fullest extent to, say, for example, as we heard earlier about using machine learning to look at the data even further and see if we can pull out even more rare sequences that might be potential hits for us. So having all those things in place is really critical to enable us to be successful in this field of either products or services that Twist is working with our customers to help enable them.
So you can enable your scientists to do the thinking rather than the mechanics of all those workflows, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I love about when I came to Twist, when I'm working with my boss, Emily Lippers, the CEO, I mean, she basically told me that, you know, we can innovate as much as we can on bringing in automation as well as software to help us do our job better. And then if we can couple that with this unlimited DNA buffet that she also provides to me, then it really leaves our scientists to be like almost unhinged in terms of their creativity that they can do. I mean, they can push through immense numbers of projects and workflows and innovate scientifically, and then don't have to be burdened with this ability to remember all this data in their head or in spreadsheets or in other systems, as well as be able to make and test a lot of things that they're thinking about through their creative process.
Got it. John, I'm curious, you know, Aaron's painting a picture of sort of high automation, heavy digitalization. How consistent is that with what you're seeing? And maybe can you color it a little more, like the journey that you're helping your customers on?
Yeah, I mean, some of our clients are just like what Aaron described, and it's really smart and it's very effective. And like you said, it scales. Some of our other clients are way, like they're more of a mature company, but they're not mature when it comes to automation and some of the technology, et cetera. So now you have to figure out how to take this group and take a couple steps back, start over, and then explain the whole automation process path that says, hey, you can't just take what you were doing and automate it. There's a lot of automation engineering that goes to that and stuff. So, you know, we deal with that, and it's critical. And so I think with the right strategy, and again, I go back to culture, with the right group of people and the right mindset, it's achievable. But some folks do struggle with this. The other point that I wanted to mention too, while Aaron was saying that, is data sciences, right? Data sciences seems to be one of those groups that they just keep piling people on. And some of these like companies that I'm talking about, because their systems and their processes are very broken and they can't scale it. So they're hiring data scientists everywhere to kind of be that, that glue or that high caliber touch to things that they're doing. And so these are big lessons learned in the industry. And if you can do what Twist is doing, you can be highly scalable, highly successful, and you're not going to bring in more people than you actually need to solve a problem.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, that comment you made about data scientists kind of taping over the problem. Like, what are the signs for those organizations that it's time to make that digital change?
Well, they're one of the biggest signs is unfairness, unfair data environments, right? You can't find it, then you find it and it's not accessible. You can't integrate it because it's not contextualized well, or it's an old technology, et cetera. And then lastly, the initiatives where machine learning and artificial intelligence just don't even come close to hitting their target because the data isn't reusable. So less data, less model quality data, and then your outcomes aren't where you were hoping they would be. With like a machine learning, a very highly capable machine learning environment can actually gain a company 40% efficiency gains in what they do. And that's a big, big deal, for when you're spending millions or billions of dollars.
The way you couch that just now, it strikes me as it's a very like consumption oriented. So there, I view this as two sides of an equation. There's production of data, which is what scientists are doing at the bench all day. And then there is the consumption side, like data scientists, ML models, et cetera, being able to use it. And the way you described it is it sounds very much like a consumption side problem. But how do you see it in the production side of things?
Well, yes and no. So a lot of the high-end producers and consumers are from a computational biology or computational chemistry. So they may take screening data or other types of ancillary data and then go off and run massive jobs and produce now massive more amounts of data. So multi-omics is another example, is where, again, you're going to be producing massive amounts of data. So producers, and then sometimes there's a shell around these groups, the bioinformatics shell, that are consumers, right? And then they're going to produce more data from that. So it's not like the old days. And the issue is with multi-omics, you need to put that data back together to get those huge insights. And if you're not going to be able to do it if you don't have your data contextualized properly and produced properly, and it's going to cause issues for people. So what are they going to do? They're going to have to hire more data scientists and more people to do the heavy lifting to make this all work.
Got it. Aaron, I'm curious, thinking back on your comments, you've been at Twist for 5 years, and it sounds like you're kind of on one end of the digital spectrum where it's pretty straightforward at Twist to make the case for automation. But has it always been that way? And like when you joined, was it already pretty far down that maturity pipeline, or is it something you've seen evolve a lot? I mean, I guess generally, to what extent has it evolved in any way that it has?
It was pretty far down the path when I joined. I mean, early on, I think Twist was trying to do it kind of the old school way, where they're, they're using spreadsheets and all these things, and they realized that they just couldn't scale that way. And they made some investments in, acquiring some a software company to help enable them to develop software systems internally. We've gone out and, of course, work with companies such as Benchling to bring in additional software to help us manage our workflows. And so it's gotten better, and we brought more and more systems online. But by the time I joined, they'd already come to the conclusion that software and automation were the primary drivers that were going to enable them to scale.
And so at Twist, when you're making the case for a new system, what are sort of key KPIs that are at the fore when you're presenting to, well, you are leadership. When people are presenting to you, what do you look for?
The systems have to be able to integrate with the current systems that we have. We have to make sure that they're not going to interfere with any other ongoing systems that we have. And then they have to bring value, of course, to the team that's trying to bring them on board. We try not to create kind of siloed data systems that kind of stand on their own, separate from others, but in some cases where some groups are separated in terms of like a service offering versus say a product offering, that is okay. But we try to integrate as much as we can from the DNA side of the business to everything else that we do. Because again, everything is for us driven by the DNA that we make.
How much do you rely on sort of paper-based ROI as a predictor? And if so, like what factors are you looking for to get return on?
So return on investment of software versus just using paper?
Or just, you know, a new solution is proposed. What sort of ROI metrics are you looking for, it, you know, beyond the ecosystem extensibility and direct problem it solves? Like, how do you know that you were successful when you bring something on?
I mean, everything that we do is, again, workflow driven. So you can track it based on, you know, turnaround time and quality of the product that we produce, and a whole series of other metrics in terms of the final deliverable that we create. And I think we always start with kind of a hands-on paper spreadsheet-based process. And then as we add on that layer of automation and software, we can see the dramatic efficiency that it creates. And we've seen it time and time again. So we don't, so I think we just have to make a case for how the system will enable that and what it will do throughout that process. And then of course, track it to make sure that we ensure that that indeed happens when we bring it on.
Gotcha. And do you have people specifically devoted to monitoring like operational metrics, or is that on a per team basis? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, everything in operations and manufacturing is closely monitored, and so we have metrics for everything that we do on the manufacturing side. And so also, if we start seeing like a decrease in performance, you know, we can, you know, dive in more closely and see if like what are the bottlenecks, what's causing this inconsistency in the terms of the criteria around like turnaround time or quality that we need to address. But I think, but again, having all those systems in place allows us to scale and do lots of things at once, and at the same time, be able to address issues that come up really quickly without kind of like hiding in underneath the surface and not being able to see them until they become too big of a problem to address.
Got it. So operational metrics are absolutely key.
Absolutely.
Critical.
Yeah, totally.
So this, you know, I'm realizing, and we've talked about this before, like you two represent two, well, John's on a continuum, but I'll say two ends of a spectrum, because Aaron, you're at an organization that already sees the case that it needs to make and makes it on a daily basis. It's kind of, you know, the DNA of Twist, if you will. You know, John, I'm curious, like, looking at the other end of the spectrum, like, how do you get people started on this journey? What are the things they should be looking for? You know, if I'm sort of collecting my operational metrics, my baseline data, what am I looking to put together to go to management and make a case?
Yeah, so we worked with a top 5 biopharma, and we spent a year doing the analysis on an ELN replacement project. And so you're going from multiple ELNs to one, maybe two, right? So we want to try to see, can we consolidate that? We spent a year in analysis with lots of dependencies. When you're working with an organization that large, the cost is, you know, in the tens of millions of dollars. You have thousands of scientists, you have all different types of science going on, but you can't dilute the offering and say, well, you're just going to use this ELN even though it's not made or built for that particular group. So it's challenging. But that type of analysis that we did to show return on investment touched on industry published materials. So 2019, I think there was PricewaterhouseCoopers published an article and said EMEA-based organizations or EU-based organizations were losing 26 billion euros a year by not having a fair data environment. So where am I going with this? So there are foundational things today in industrialized science, right? One of those is the scientific method. And that's what people did in paper for a long time. And the reason you take notes and the reason you do this is because you want, one of the reasons is reproducible science. So in today, if you're not doing these things from a digital perspective, first of all, you're going to have a huge overhead, but your things aren't searchable like they could be in an electronic environment. You're going to miss insights. And then you're not sure where that data is going. So not only do you have to implement a solution like that properly, it has to be adopted. You can't have, a percentage of compliance. Everyone must use it and put in their methods, their data, etc. This type of approach comes with a lot of overhead for that adoption reason alone. You can't have a paper on glass or a non-templated ELN for more than 6 months at a time. So there's just a lot to it. So when you do that analysis on that return on investment, there's a lot of factors that come in. One is what I mentioned, the published material, but then if you add up all the different scientists and the insights they could miss, et cetera, unfortunately, in a large organization like that, the return on investment could be $3 billion. And why do I say that? Well, because somebody screwed up and didn't realize that this compound or this large molecule or whatever had the potential to be a blockbuster for the company. So the range is, it could be a $3 billion return on investment, or it could be in the tens of millions of dollars. And that's the level you're at when you're at a large organization that for years has been using something different. It's grown long in the tooth. Everybody's uncomfortable with what they have. It's time to move on. It's time to move in a collaborative environment. And it takes effort, and that return on investment is a key justification for moving forward for a large organization. And even you could put all the data in front of them and they still might say, you know what, we're not doing it this year because we have candidates in the pipeline that we have to get out. We have to take that money and spend it there. So it's a multivariate problem. There's all types of issues why things would move forward or not in a timely manner.
Sure. I mean, everything looks great on paper, but it has to happen in real life, right?
Exactly.
No, that's not what I meant to say. Everything looks great in a digital system, but it still has to happen in real life.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you said something early in your answer that's near and dear to my heart. Just you look at really large organizations as part of your clientele, and obviously they have a lot of different programs running. So how do they solve the problem of finding a standardized platform, but still providing the use value to each individual program underneath it?
Yeah, you're touching on a very, very important topic of, so best in class versus a platform that can do a lot of things that those individual pieces. Is that the question you're asking?
Yeah, so like you could end up with, dozens of point solutions, or maybe a few point solutions and one platform, or you settle on a platform and say, we can make this work because ultimately the value is there. Like, How do you do that analysis and decide what end of the spectrum to land on? And maybe if you can share some examples of success.
Yeah, no, it's a process. It's a journey. That's the most important thing. And people should stop thinking about things as a project. They should be thinking about it as we're on a journey, because it doesn't ever truly end. So that's number one. Number two is another problem in larger companies is sometimes they never get rid of anything they have. It's very difficult to sunset or deprecate a solution, right? And people hold on to things longer. So this goes back to the whole scientific data strategy piece that dictates and guides companies on how and when they should do certain things. So you have to identify the problems, the root causes to some of these things. Why aren't we getting rid of these? Why aren't we turning them off? Why can't we settle on a platform and work from there? Like maybe we'll have a best in breed solution and it stays, but we're also going to use this platform for higher level processes, et cetera. So like we mentioned before, like an electronic lab notebook. And there are sometimes reasons why you want to use not necessarily the minimal viable product that somebody puts out as a platform. Maybe you're going to do some configuration or advanced configuration to it, but you'll still keep some of those best in breed solutions. But over time, you start to really, it almost is, it's almost on the partner vendor to constantly improve their product or solution And when they do that, it makes it easier to start to collapse those best in class solutions and start to roll those into the platform over time. I would be leery if a client today in research and development comes out and says, oh, we have this platform, it can do everything, or it can do 95% of what you do. That would be true in a smaller company, but in a more mature company, it's going to be a journey that you're going to go on, and that platform is going to have to be added to over time to fulfill those needs.
Mm-hmm. You're definitely hitting on something we think a lot about at Benchling around sort of partnership, right? Recognizing it is a journey. And so when you choose a technology vendor, you're making a commitment for, generally a mid to long-term relationship. And this is a question for either of you. I guess I'll point to Aaron first. Like, what do you look for in your technology vendors for making digitalization enhancements and changes?
I really look for flexibility. I think, is, like I said, everything we do is all about DNA, but we have a multitude of different products, different types of workflows. And so we're looking for software partners that have the ability to flex along with our different workflows. And so I have found in my journey that there's sometimes some software systems that are very rigid, like they basically make you kind of conform to their workflow and their way of working. And that's made it very difficult. And oftentimes the users typically abandon all use of that particular system because it just doesn't conform to the way that we work. And so, one thing that I often look for, which Benchling definitely helps us do, is that they're very flexible in terms of pivoting to the way we work and creating a system that works for us rather than the other way around. So that's definitely something that I look for in software partners that we bring in to help enable our workflows.
John, same question to you.
Yeah, no, I think what Aaron's saying is absolutely correct. So in today's world, the days of very, how do I say this? The old school LIMS systems and stuff that were required a professional services engagement every time you wanted to do something, or they would configure this for you, those days are kind of over. In today's composable architectures, highly configurable WYSIWYG front ends is what companies need to be, in my opinion, competitive and successful. And so that's what's going to drive the adoption and the ability, the intuitiveness and the adoption of these tools will make this all happen. It's not easy. And the other thing is, so first it has to be able to handle the science. So is it scientifically aware? Yes, you get a check mark for that. Is it highly configurable? Yes, you get a check mark for that. And then the most important, that it's sometimes hidden or glossed over, is the capability of the company to deliver. So professional services, right? You can have the best software in the world, but if your professional services are, completely backed up, understaffed, whatever, and they can't deliver on that dream or that vision, then that creates a major problem. So we look for companies that not only have a very strong professional services, but then they also have collaborators that could also deliver professional services aside of them, or even maybe without them. They've been trained and they're able to help.
Got it. Yep. That makes a ton of sense, and obviously a big part of our fabric here at Benchling. Sort of pivoting the conversation a little bit, I've been thinking as we're talking about sort of role-based or persona-based actions that one can take to hasten this change. And so, John, I'm curious, like if I'm a person in a lab, how can I best surface my needs and help make the case for change to my leadership? Like, what does that look like for me?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, you're going to have to put it in terms of, you're going to have to self-retrospect and understand, what are you spending your time on? So here's some real numbers. If you're spending 80% of your time in data wrangling, and this happens in bigger companies, how effective and how cost effective are you in the laboratory today? 40 to 80%, that's a lot of a scientist's time. And this is really what starts to help calculate a return on investment. So if you do the due diligence, say for yourself, for your team, for your department, and you say, hey, this will pay for itself if we transform. And we come into the next generation or the next century. This will help our company significantly. And then there's that aspect of it, and then you have to figure out what's the change management path. How are we going to do this? How are we going to make it palatable? And I mean that's really what it comes down to. You have to prove, you have to do your due diligence to say this transformation is going to lead to A, B, C, D.
Mm-hmm. And Aaron, I'm curious from your perspective, I mean, not all Twist, but in your previous life as well, like what sorts of things would you encourage a bench scientist to evolve in front of management to make these cases?
Kind of going back to what I was saying before. I mean, I find scientists to be very creative individuals, and they, and if you empower them with tools such as automation or pieces of equipment or software, they can produce way more than just like, their own physical work at the bench. So, and so I'm always thinking about ways to help an individual scientist collaborate more with others through software, as well as basically take a lot of things off their plate so they don't have to do like working up their data constantly. Maybe they have systems in place that automatically do that for them. And so, and as well as curate the data and find themes through that data. So if we can do that much more readily in an automated fashion, so they don't have to do that by hand, that can only enable them to do much more at the same time in parallel. So that's my view on it. And it's really kind of convincing others the power of that, those data systems to enable that kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to comment on that. So I'm generalizing here, but I have to say it. I mean, we have generation gaps when it comes to technology, when it comes to automation and things like that. So in younger companies, some of the folks have grown up with technology, right? They've probably coded, right? They've written Python, they've done things. So that adoption seems to be a no-brainer for some of the, I'm just going to say, some of the younger generations. Some of the older generations aren't as easy to convince or to make the case to say, hey, we want to take you from the way you've been doing this for 10 or 15 years, maybe longer, and now we want to give you this. And it's difficult for some of the scientists to make that leap. And I'm not saying everyone, I'm just saying the ones, they can be great scientists, brilliant scientists, incredible chemists, biologists, whatever, but they're not technology savvy. And so you have to put more into it to get them over some of those adoption hurdles.
Yeah, we basically have to paint a picture for them what it would look like if they got to that point, and then make it super easy for them to transition towards it. So
yeah,
and you can't make the lift too much for them, otherwise they're not going to do it. So
yeah, well, one of the issues too that we see a lot, Excel is the #1 life sciences tool, right? So you have this spreadsheet that somebody built over the past 10 years and it does everything, right? And now you say, yeah, but nobody else can get to this data. It's siloed. It's not contextualized well. What happens if you leave? The support issues. So you just go down the line. But at the end of the day, it's like putting shoes on in the morning for them. They've used this thing for so long, and it's difficult to get them away from it. So we have to come up with strategies and plans to walk them away from that, and it takes time.
You're both making me, I've talked about this a lot in the past. It makes me think of the incentives of work, or really like what a scientist's job is in 2022. It's moved so much from sort of this like very bespoke paper-based process to now like high throughput automation driven activities. And I think one thing that maybe isn't translating from graduate school into industry is what actually is happening at these forefront companies. The digital revolution. I think if you're a computational biologist, you're seeing a lot of it, but if you work in other areas, it's still, you know, universities probably a little bit behind in terms of technology. I'm curious if that, you know, Aaron or John, is that what you see from new people coming in, or are they showing up pretty well versed in modern tech and ready to hit the ground running?
I can take it first if you want,
Oh,
Aaron.
yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah. So I've dealt with a lot of this. I've even contacted a number of schools to say, hey, you guys got to get this in your curriculum. You know, you're killing us out here. There's not a lot of informatics being taught now. It's coming, and there's more and more as we speak, but there's still a barrier or a bottleneck from school to industry. I remember having to try to convince a bright academic first year into a biotech how important the foundational part of entity registration was. Like, I had to walk through and explain why you're going to uniquely identify and register your plasmids, your cell lines, you go down the line, you know, all the biological entities, etc. And they're like, nah, I'm just going to keep it in a spreadsheet and I'm not going to worry about it. But I'm like, yeah, you're not going to worry about it, but you're going to get into this point where you're going to start making costly and serious mistakes, and your science isn't going to be reproducible. And what happens if you leave in a year? Who's going to come and understand any of this? Because it's not documented, it's not this. So they're difficult conversations, and you have to find ways to convince people, like, hey, there are foundational things we have to do in industrialized science and drug discovery and therapy discovery, and one of them is to get extremely organized, because things are moving at computer and clock speed, not human speed, and we just can't keep up with it.
Aaron, are you seeing similar things at Twist, or do you hire for a genotype that comes tech ready?
I think the thing that oftentimes people need to learn coming in to maybe the first time that they're working in a company is just that to work in an ecosystem where you have a multitude of people that are sharing lots of different pieces of data together collectively as a team. Like, normally in a university, or like even when you're getting your PhD, like, you're basically driving your own project all by yourself, and you're managing your own data system in a way. I think when you get to a company, it's not like that. Like, you have to, you know, create data, run an experiment, get some data, hand it off to somebody else, have them analyze it, move it on to something. So it all has to be interconnected. And so getting this discipline of living in that kind of ecosystem and understanding how software enables you to exchange those pieces of data, and the automation that brings in all the data is really key, is something that needs to be taught before they get to industry. And I think that's the piece that's missing right now.
Gotcha. Industry is a team sport.
The ultimate team sport.
It totally is. Yeah. that's how we succeed that's how we succeed in biotech, is through teamwork and people. Like, and then the software and the data systems enable us to collectively get together as a team and share so much more than just the collective power of working together. It's the sharing of data and everything that enables us to get there.
I experienced a pretty radical end of that spectrum. I was at Bolt Threads for a while, and we were going from molecular biology design to fabric production. At the time, we were making spider silk protein, which would then get processed into actual silk fiber and made into garments. And so I'm sure there's like a Far Side comic somewhere with a computational biologist and a you know, fabric test engineer having some sort of interaction. But that's the reality of industry in so many ways, especially these super sophisticated materials companies, you know, the artificial meats and so on and so forth.
This is real. Let me just, so I want to comment like on kind of what, so transformation is the key word in all this, right? What does transformation mean? It doesn't just mean change. It means everyone must change, from the CEO all the way down to the new hire. And that takes alignment. That takes change management and things like that. So anytime you allow people to deviate from that, you know, so it's kind of like taking pieces out of a wall, right? It's eventually going to collapse, right? So it's almost like an all or nothing. Hey, we're going to transform as a company. This is how we're going to do it moving forward. There's really no exceptions. But if you allow those exceptions, it's going to erode the foundation that you're trying to build.
Yeah, it requires discipline. Yeah.
Yeah, absolute commitment and discipline.
I would say it also requires that you have a good level by level perspective of what it means. So, an executive can have a big picture, like, I want to apply AI ML to our pipeline. I want to improve our operational efficiency. But there can be a disconnect for the person sitting in front of the computer actually doing the typing and clicking. What does that actually mean for me? So along with that sort of cultural philosophical movement needs to be a holistic technical strategy that accounts for every persona in the value chain.
Yeah.
We're going to move to Q&A shortly, but I want to ask one quick hit question of either of you. So much of what we've talked about today revolves around change management. And I'm curious if you can share just like one nugget of wisdom of what's worked best in your experience to successfully manage that change. And I'll point to Aaron first.
I'll go back to what I was saying before about really painting the picture and painting the path to enable change. I'm a pretty optimistic person, so I love to kind of think about and innovate and kind of think about new visions for the future. And I'm always trying to like bring people along and kind of convince them how we could get there and what it truly could enable them to do. And so I think you have to think about it from the other person's perspective and really show them how beneficial this particular solution could be for them, not necessarily for me, and then help kind of guide them along the path. I think and again, it applies to anything you want, any kind of change you want to create in a company. You have to kind of bring people along. You can't just like tell them to do it and they'll immediately do it. You have to kind of show them the way and incentivize them to really see how it could be truly great. And that's been really critical for, especially in groups like John was saying before, that have like been kind of entrenched in ways that they've been doing something for so long. I think Twist was kind of unique in the sense that we kind of started with data systems and automation early on. And so it wasn't really a huge ask for a lot of people to come along for the ride. But I think in some industries where they've been doing the same way with paper and spreadsheets for so long, it's just really hard to do. And so I think going back to what we were talking about before, just creating that path, creating that story, creating that enablement, making it easy, and then showing them how impactful it could be for their own work and enable them to be much more successful in the end, I think is really the key to success.
I think that's a really good blending of what John was saying earlier around sort of the cultural shift at every level.
Sure.
And the individual, the actual technical, because people need to be bought into the vision. They
Absolutely.
need to see where it's going.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. John, last little bit, any nuggets of change management you'd like to share?
Yeah, and you guys kind of basically reiterated what I was saying. With the right culture, you can, everybody's heard culture eats strategy for lunch, breakfast, and dinner, right? So with the right culture, your strategy becomes easier. And when you have the right culture, that means your change becomes easier because people are bought in, they're aligned, the alignment's been done. It's a culture first organization. And then so the change becomes seamless. And that's critical. And then what you have as well is you manage change like you manage everything else in a professional organization, operations, strategy, etc. So you have a change management umbrella that says this is how we do it and this is how we're going to do it. And then again, personas, you were talking about personas. Every persona knows what role they play in the change. So it just falls in line. And whenever you're part of an organization like this, you're just blown away about how things get done and how efficiently.
Very cool. Yeah, everything revolves around culture. There's no question about that. You see it over and over again. So right before we go into our Q&A, I'm going to prompt everyone for a poll that's going to flash up on your screen. If you'd like to learn more about biotech R&D, digital transformation, or would like to see it in action in a demo, please vote below and we'll reach out to you. This will be coming from Benchling. All right, so we have some really great questions in the Q&A. And this one kind of is on theme for everything we've been talking about. The audience member asks, what are some of the biggest challenges you have encountered when making the transition from spreadsheets and point solutions to integrated platforms such as Benchling, and how do you overcome them? I'll go to you first, John. I think this is kind of your daily life.
Yeah. So the thing that you have to understand, so, I hate to be too repetitive here, but you have to understand the ability for a group to change. Change management isn't a vice president of a company saying, you're in a meeting and say, I'm going to just go down into the hall and I'm just going to tell everyone they have to do this. That is not change management, right? Change management is a process of where you work with folks, you see what the hurdles are, you check on alignment, and you make sure people are able to get from one step to the next. So some groups you have to make it very palatable and make it very stepwise. Some groups are all on board and they want the big bang. They want this now, and they want us to configure this and get this workflow ready. The last thing I'll say is business process mapping. Scientific business process mapping is so critical. And I'm going to tell you why. Because most people think they do a certain thing in the lab, and then you shadow them and they're like, oh, I thought I did it that way. I said, like, what are you doing? And they're like, well, we go over here and we do this. And I said, but that's not what you said you did, right? The reason this is so important, because when you gather requirements to purchase and enable a solution like Benchling, if those requirements are off, it's going to cause problems when you go to implement. So you really need to understand what you do in the lab, and then that helps new hires for training. It helps your supervisors truly understand what's going on, and it just allows for this change to happen better and faster.
The word that comes to mind as you were answering that is empathy. That leadership has a deep understanding of what motivates people that are in spreadsheets and point solutions, and making sure that whatever the replacement is, and Aaron, I'm going to steal gratuitously from you, that they have a vision of how this becomes a better fit for their day-to-day lives. So hopefully I didn't just steal your answer, but I'm curious what you think about that transition and the challenges there.
Again, yeah, the only thing I would add maybe is a time element too. I think sometimes people want to like have it happen overnight, and I think we're so busy doing everything that we can with our current systems that we oftentimes feel like we don't have the time to change. So I think I would add that as leaders, we have to provide the time to then implement, and not super slow, but gradually move into that new system, and at the same time show the power of having this new system in place, and how much more beneficial it is than compared to the old one. So I think we have to give people the time and space to transition. Otherwise, if we're just adding on something on top of what they already do, it's going to make it really hard for them to change.
Yeah. One strategy building on that I've seen work really well in the past is, instead of trying to take the entire organization along for the ride all at once, you can pick like a reference architecture, a reference team, and find those sort of like champions of change and go after that. And then they become a model for the rest of the organization to see like, what is the power of this transformation and what value it can bring to any given team, just reflected in what that team experienced.
Exactly.
I'm really intrigued by this question that was asked, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts. And it's a little maybe antithetical to my role, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there a place for open source LIMS or ELNs in biotech?
I'll let John
go first.
Take that one.
Okay. I mean, the answer is maybe, yes. It comes down to cost, right? And so you really have to do the same due diligence you're going to do when you're going to buy a professional piece of scientific software. So let's say you're a startup with 5 people, your budgets are 0, right? You have no extra money to buy things, but you don't want to work in your spreadsheets and do things a certain way, you know where things might be going. So you have to, as part of every entrance strategy into a new solution, you better have your exit strategy already mapped out. So are you going to use this for a temporary piece of time? Do you plan on using this forever, et cetera, et cetera? What you don't get in open source many times is a level of support that you would get with a company like Benchling. So believe it or not, as your company grows and hopefully scales, that becomes an incredibly important piece of offering, because now you're going to have to hire your own IT group of people that are going to manage this. And what's the return on investment for doing all that? If at some point you're just going to throw it out, you probably want to be in a more professional environment, again, when you can afford it. I can only think of the cost factor for doing something like this.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me very much of the build versus buy argument. Having something open source would ultimately be much closer to building from the ground up anyway. So
yes,
maybe the ROI isn't there. I'm going to take on another question, and this one is around the academic space we hit on a little bit. Why do you feel there's been particular resistance in academic labs to adopting electronic data systems? How are they able to continue making discoveries with such dated technologies? I have a couple thoughts. If you guys don't mind, I'll start.
Oh, sure.
I think part of it is awareness, just knowing what's out there. You're very siloed in the academic world often, and you kind of like the lay of the land is what's directly in front of you, what your PI knows about, what your fellow teammates know about. Benchling offers an academic version for free, and we see people who use it, enjoy it, and love it. So it's just about, for us getting out there and letting people know. And I would address how do they continue to make discoveries? I mean, I think there is a fairly well-spoken problem in academic research of reproducibility. And I think that speaks a lot to what John's brought up several times around fair data. Labs aren't able to reproduce each other's work. I think numbers, I probably misremembering the stat, but somewhere in the 40 to 60% range. It's pretty high, right? And so I might question if our underlying supposition that discoveries are being made at the clip that they are is really true. Maybe it's, one is I think it would improve the quality of discoveries being made, with underlying data systems, certainly the reproducibility. And two is it comes down to productivity. What could grad students be doing more of if they had the digital systems to support them? And that's sort of an open question to be pondered. But Aaron, I'm curious, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, kind of going back to what I was saying before, I mean, I think it is definitely when I was a graduate student, I was like a group of one. I mean, I had some collaboration with maybe a couple other academic labs and across the in other parts of Boston, but it's a pretty siloed experience, and so you really don't, in many cases, maybe have a need for it. And I think so, but I think as academic institutions become more like companies and there is a lot more collaboration and data sharing, I think that will necessitate a need for it eventually in academia. But I think they're just a little later to the game than a lot of companies who have already had to innovate and bring on board these systems because it's very critical for succeeding and competing in this space.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how digital system adoption trends as a function of sort of, core facility utilization or groups in these sort of mega site grants where you have 20 teams working together. I'd imagine they have to look more holistically overall. And so less of a problem there.
Yeah. I'll be a little blunt, I think, with this. I think if your university doesn't have electricity, okay, I'll give you a pass on not having an ELN in your lab or as a grad student or an undergrad using. So I just think it's a huge miss in the industry today, and in academia today, based on the outputs that we're getting. We're not getting reproducibility. We're getting a lot of folks that could just start to, it's like going into the Army or into the military and going through boot camp and getting kind of reoriented, getting organized, getting acclimated. In science and in academic labs, there should be just a standard set there, right? And like you said, there's a lot of free academic packages for folks out there to stay organized. Because I can guarantee you, a lot of the PIs and they don't know where a lot of this data is at. They may have a notebook, they may not. They may know where the data is. It may be on hard drives somewhere, et cetera. It's a huge problem. And I think the sooner folks fall in line, the better off we're going to be. And then we can start really mining that data, reusing that data, and making it fair. And I know it's a huge problem in academia.
Yeah. Well, great. We're coming up on the top of the hour, which means we must bid adieu. John and Aaron, I want to thank you for all of your insights. I'm walking away from today thinking that focus on this change is really around operational metrics, understanding how life could be better across an entire organization. Put another way, like what money are we leaving on the table by not moving more aggressively into the digital and automated regimes? So with that, thank you to Endpoint for hosting and our audience for listening today.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.